This is Dustin Pickering with the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Today we are bringing you the Faceless guest, or not bringing you the Faceless guest. Our guest today had to excuse herself, so we are going to move on with the show and talk about Emily Dickinson. And so be prepared for this excellent discussion concerning her work and her life. Who was Emily Dickinson? Well, they can say much madness is divine assent to a discerning eye. But Emily Dickinson left school as a teenager, eventually living a reclusive life on the family homestead. She wrote tons and tons of beautiful poetry and letters, and her sister discovered her work and published it in a sort of bastardized form, which we recognize now. She was a very original voice. She had her roots in New England, in Amherst. Her grandfather, Samuel Dickinson, was the founder of Amherst College. I didn't know this, by the way. Some things I do not know. And she was educated at Amherst Academy, now Amherst College, for 7 years, and attended Mount Holyoke Female Seminary for a year. She left in 1848, and some rumors say she was in a fragile state, and her father pulled her from the school. And she never was officially religious or normally religious as we would know it, but her poetry does have a very spiritualistic character to it. And she began writing as a teenager. She was sent a book by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And she went to Philadelphia and befriended a minister named Charles Wadsworth, who would become one of her correspondents. Mm-hmm. One of her closest friends and an advisor was Susan Gilbert, who is possibly a love interest as well. In 1956, Gilbert married Dickinson's brother, William. They lived on the property and homestead in Amherst. And after the marriage, William and Susan settled in a property next to Homestead known as the Evergreens. And they were chief caregivers for their ailing mother until she passed in 1882. Neither Emily nor her sister married or lived together at the homestead until their respective deaths. And her seclusion as a faceless poet has been subject of much speculation. Some say she suffered from agoraphobia, depression, anxiety, which all of us poets know these kinds of ailments. It's very powerful to deal with and very difficult. And she may have been sequestered due to her responsibilities as a guardian of her sick mother. And again, we have mystery here. Very mysterious woman. She was treated for a painful ailment of her eyes. And she left the homestead from the late 1850s to the mid-60s. And she was most productive as a poet, creating small bundles of verse without any awareness on the part of her family members. And in her spare time, Dickinson studied botany, and produced a vast herbarium. She maintained correspondence with a variety of contacts. One of her friendships with Judge Otis Phillips Lord seems to have developed into a romance before Lord's death in 1884. Some of her poems are addressed to Judge Otis Phillips Lord. She died of heart failure in Amherst on May 15, 1886, at the age of 55. She was laid to rest in the family plot at West Cemetery. Where Dickinson was born is now a museum. Little of her work was published at the time of her death, and as I mentioned earlier, when it was published, it was heavily edited to fit the conventions of the time. Much of the power of her verse and syntax was lost in those alterations. However, later in several years, many years later, 1955, the previous versions were released. Her stature as a writer soared from the first publications of her poems in their intended form. He profoundly influenced 20th century poetry. The strength of her literary voice, as well as her reclusive and eccentric life, contributes to the sense of Dickinson as an indelible American character who continues to be discussed today. And this was from biography.com. So we're going to have, I guess, a little discussion here about the Faceless poets. If Mutiu, if you want to add something there, as far as anything you want to mention, I can read a Much Madness is My Essence, which I opened up.
Our experience today really gave me the recall of my experience when I was in the university studying the life and works of Emily Dickinson. I remember one of the most popular poems of this lady called "Because I Could Not Stop for Death." It kindly stopped for me. Very, very popular. It's very unique. It's just like "Death Be Not Proud." You know.
They say that she, her rhythms, because of the verse structure she uses, that it follows along with the Yellow Rose of Texas. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. You know, so that's an interesting little tidbit of knowledge. I was taught that by my teacher, Mrs. Telchik, from O'Connell Catholic School in Galveston.
Apart from that, we'll be going deeply into these poems, one after the other. Another poem that strikes my mind anytime I remember this lady is "Hope is the thing with feathers." Hope is the thing with feathers. It's another very popular poem of this lady. And why she decided to be faceless, if you check deeply into the history of the life of this lady, she got a lot of challenges at a tender age, and she got rejected by her lover, according to the stories or history of this of the biography of this lady. And she decided, having been rejected by the person she loves most, she decided to say, no, I think I have to put a stop to to having any link with human being, because human beings are not reliable. So even when she was dying, she didn't allow doctor to attend to her physically. They were passing whatever she has to use through the bottom of the door, you know. So that's how she survived. And we've had people today attempting that, but with modern technology, it becomes very difficult for you to hide yourself. Even the Buddhist leaders who decide to go into the forest, the journalists will still go to them and cover their activities in the forest, just to go away from people, but people will still go to them because of modern technology. If they cannot access the place, they use the drone to get access to where the person is and then cover what the person has been doing there. So it was easy for her because of the level of technology at that time. But when I realized that our guest today, you know, we had initially invited her about 2 days or 3 days ago, and unfortunately we could not have her on the show. We were able to get replacement. And she told us that she does not want to appear on the screen. She doesn't want people to know her. She just wants to be behind the camera talking. My mind went straight to Emily Dickinson. And I thought to myself, would it be possible for this lady to survive in this technological age, for people not to have access to her? And today I was looking at the best way to even have this properly recorded. Remember, I was trying to tell you how we'll be able to have this show in a way that our viewers will not think we're using a computer voice to respond to them, or to play on their mind. So Last minute, we just realized that we could not find her again. So we hope to bring her. Viewers, we are sorry that we couldn't have her today, but we'll try as much as possible to convince her to get on the show with us. She may not show her face. That I can't promise you. But whatever we can do to get the raw talent in this lady, Elena, we will try as much as we can to convince her. We are sorry we couldn't bring her today, but we're going to explore the world of Emily Dickinson in detail. We'll look at some of her poems and we'll see what we can share with you today. Dustin, if you have other things to say related to a poem, maybe you have something to say before I now move to
Yeah,
the exploration in
I'd
detail.
like to read Much Madness is Divine Sense. It's a very short poem. And I memorized this poem many years ago, but I'm going to read it from here from Poetry Foundation. They do a lot of great work. Much madness is divine sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this as all prevail. Assent, and you are sane. Demur, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. That's Much Madness is Divine Sense, in this poem 620 from Emily Dickinson. Hope our viewers have enjoyed that rendition that I just did. And also, I'll read the one we mentioned earlier. Hope is the thing with feathers.
Which one is that? Hope.
Hope is the thing with feathers.
Okay, please go ahead. I'm going to read Because I Could Not Stop for Death.
Okay. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me.
Impressive. Now let's consider this poem. We're going to explore these poems later. We'll look at some of the poetic devices, the element of poetry, and the content of our poem. But let us enjoy the poems as they flow. Because I could not stop for death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove. At recess in the ring, we passed the field of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my taper only to lay. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, these centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horse's head were towards eternity. That's the end of the poem.
Powerful. It just it strikes you. You know, it hits you right in the heart. One I would like to give a good read of. There's a certain slant of light. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, The landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death.
Well, if you look at some of these lines of Emily Dickinson, you find out that she awaits the dead before the arrival of the dead itself. It's like someone who was so tired of living in this world as a result of frustration or the challenges or complication of this world, and she decided to focus on the end of the human being, which is death. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to also read another poem from this of this very unique writer, unique poet. That there's no way if you study American literature, if you have not passed through Emily Dickinson, you haven't passed through American literature. Anywhere in the world, you study English language or literature and you fail to pass through this, then you haven't got anything meaningful to present. I want us to maybe just briefly look at some of the poems, explore them together before I will now, because there are a lot of poems that she wrote. Like I felt a funeral in my brain. You see, it's still related to death. That's why I said the lady left the world before she left the world physically. You know? So I'm starting with one of the poems that was rendered by my co-host here, Dustin. Remember, the hope is the thing with feathers. This is a different
Yes.
Emily Dickinson poem. It's warm and positive. Positivity speak to my God every time. You know, always pause on the inverted commas around the word hope. You know, if you look at the inverted commas there, you have to relax if you look at that part. And you wonder why Dickinson felt the need for them. Was she qualifying hope in some private ways? Dickinson was a fan of Emily Bronte, you know. She chose the English writers No Coward Soul Is Mine to be read at her funeral. You know, was hope is the thing with further influenced by Bronte's poem Hope. You know, within which hope stretched her wing and soared to the heaven. So if so, Dickinson chose to make her poem life affirming, a counterpoint to Bronte more downbeat verse on the same theme. So if you look at some of her poems, of course, she passed through some people to get the skill in the area of poetry, and she had read poems of others. And if you truly want to become unique, you should have a model or a pattern or someone that you believe in their style. You try it and you can create your own style. There's nothing bad in creating your own style, but the beginning of your writing would definitely have something to do with sampling the ideas of those established and coming up with your own later when you've established yourself. That's for hope is the thing with feathers. You have anything?
It also reminds me of when the cage bird sings, that phrase. You know, I know now why the cage bird sings. You know, the song is sung in spite of despair and agony in the world. And so hope is the thing with feathers, sort of compares it to a bird. And in a way that's what it sounds like, the same sort of reference.
Yeah, but if you also, I also, if you look at the poem I also read, that is because I could not stop for death. This poem, perhaps, if you check most of the poems of Dickinson, you will realize that most of them are melancholic. You know, they deal with death and the afterlife. This may be tied with the notion that because Dickinson was reclusive, You know, she was also angsty and nun-like. She lived like a nun, you know, because she
Hmm.
never got married after the disappointment, according to history. Whether she intentionally decided to be closer to God or because of that disappointment, only God knows. But that's what the history says about Emily Dickinson. It may also be linked to a general fascination with those who beat their own path, particularly if they seem to do it alone. The Grim Reaper in this poem is a civil gentleman who takes the narrator, already ghost-like in Gossamer and Tuller, gently towards death. You know, it is hopeful, meditative poem about the promise of immortality. That's why if you check, that word immortality is in the first stanza, the last line of the first stanza of the poem. So one thing I generally found out about this lady is that if you want to really think about afterlife, read more of the poems of Emily Dickinson. Then you will definitely forget about the vanity of this world and you start struggling to meet your Lord in peace.
Yeah, she had a very unconventional spirituality. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, she did study theology a little bit and was in part of a seminary school, which maybe no telling what kind of crisis she may have had, or if there was a crisis. Um, Maybe she had a crisis of conscience of some kind of conflict with what she was being taught, or maybe she just had her own intuition that she decided to follow.
One of the
Very
poems I would
individualistic
like you to
person.
read, if you can get it, is My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun. You know, this poem is very, very powerful. If you have that, you let me know. If you can read that out. Is You know, Emily Dickinson
Yes, got it.
excels at the explosive first line that draws the readers in. My life had stood a loaded gun. Is one of her strongest opener. You know, in most of the writing, or most of her
Yes,
poems. You know,
absolutely.
have you got the poem now?
Yes.
No. Okay, could you please read the poem? Let's have
My
it
life had
before we now
stood a
explore it
loaded
together.
gun.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day the owner passed, identified, and carried me away. And now we roam in sovereign woods, and now we hunt the doe. And every time I speak for him, the mountains straight reply. And do I smile such cordial light upon the valley glow? It is as a Vesuvian face had let its pleasure through. And when at night, our good day done, I guard my master's head, 'tis better than the eider duck's deep pillow to have shared. To foe of his, I'm deadly foe, none stirred the second time, on whom I lay a yellow eye or an empathic thumb. Though I am he, may longer live, he longer must than I, for I have but the power to kill without the power to die.
When I was there was a time we were discussing this poem and we were looking at what kind of message this lady was trying to convey to a listener or a reader. And some say that the poem is about the afterlife. Some say no, it's not about the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
It may be about an actual lover. Some say no, no, no. She's not really interested in being a lover. They say that it may be a meditation on anger, hopelessness, and power. Whatever it is,
Right.
poetry can be interpreted in any way. the best interpreter of the poem is the poet themselves. Okay, no one can interpret a poem like the poet or the writer of the poem. So in a nutshell, you can only try making reference to some of the lines. But if you look at this poem, even if you have a very strong heart and you feel that you can do and undo whatever you like, by the time you read through this poem deeply, you get relieved. So I can agree with whoever that says a meditation on anger, hopelessness, and power. I also agree with whoever that says about the afterlife. Or what do you think, Dustin?
Audrey and Rich wrote an essay called Vesuvius at Home, and I believe she covered a lot of these questions. And I think, yes, I agree that you can perceive it in any particular angle. For me, it feels like she's it's about kind of like a self-control, like a maintaining a deep well within yourself and trying to channel that. And the gun as her life is you can look at that as she's a loaded gun ready to be fired out into the afterlife, or she could be saying that she's channeling her aggression as a poet into the poetry, and her life is stood as a loaded gun because of her frustrations and encounters with disappointment. Maybe she says later on, the good day done, and she's, I guess she comes home in a way. She says that the gun itself at the end, towards the end, she says, I guard my master's head. 'Tis better than the eider duck's deep pillow to have shared.
Some refer to the gun as the language. They believe that language is a gun. Yeah. Stuff. Or what do you think?
So she's saying, I think she's saying those last lines I quoted, she's saying that it was better for her to live as a poet secluded than to be, say, engaged to the judge that she was not able to fulfill herself with, or possibly the other love interest she had. Maybe that's what she's saying. She's happy and she's taking the contentment of her life as it is, even with its rage and discontents.
Perhaps that's why maybe some people say that the poem talks about Dickinson's backlash against having to write poetry in secret, gone as the language, waiting right. to go off, So I think they might be right because of the last part of the poem. Another poem I wanted to look through, if you can find that, is Tell All the Truth, but Tell It Slant. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Is this, we know that Emily Dickinson loved readers, and this poem has an element of that playfulness. By the time you listen to Dustin, you get to understand what I'm talking about. And if you've got that, Dustin, let me know so that we can go deeply into that and then we explore it together. Tell all the truth.
Yes, I've got it.
Each slant. Okay, good. Please go ahead.
Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind.
You know why I said what I said earlier, that the poem has an element that of that playfulness. You can understand that what is trying to say here is that you should write the poem, but don't spell it out. Don't explain your poem. Let people find the message. That's buttress the message what I said earlier, that poetry can best be interpreted by the poet themselves. So it means that the poem is saying that you should decorate your message with imagery and let readers slowly grasp the meaning. That is dazzle gradually. That's what it means. So as a poet, do not simplify it, but I think we need to discuss this. The life of that time has changed. The poetry, the way people see poetry in the past, is no longer the way it is today. People have decided to go simpler than before. When you
Right.
write too complex poem, they will say you are too academic these days. And do you feel that if we have too much imageries in our poem, do you feel average readers will be able to read and understand this, Dustin?
I think that depends if the images are maybe direct and accessible to the person reading. We talk like her last poem talked about a gun. People know what a gun can be possibly mean or symbolize easily. It's within their consciousness they can think of it and say, oh, okay, well, a gun could be this and this and this, and metaphorically. I think putting imagery in a poem, I actually agree with the premise that that's a good way of expressing the truth. I think we're kind of hunkering down in today's world amongst poets in the poetry community, completely different goals, set of ideas than the past, which is fine. I'm certainly not condemning that. But I think that I like poetry that makes you think a little bit and reflect a little bit on what I would call deeper truths than can
Actually,
be
I'm looking
expressed
at
directly.
when something is too much, it is bad.
Yes,
I'm looking at too
yes.
much of imagery in a poem. In the past we used to have a lot of it, but nowadays it's been simplified to the extent that you don't need to stress yourself too much before you understand what the poet is talking about. Most of the great or established poets that we have today, even the academically minded poets today do not
Hmm.
really bother much about putting too much of imageries to confuse the readers, but to elaborate your message beyond just ordinary prosaic presentation. There's nothing bad about that. But when you keep every line is filled with imageries,
Right.
you spoil the show completely. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. And I think when she says the truth must dazzle gradually or every man be blind, she's talking about that kind of economy of language you're referring to. Yeah, totally. I think, you concentrate too much. You don't say enough, but in the language itself, too much, you know, toying with images and playing with wordplay and stuff like that can probably be pretty confound the reader too much and maybe even make them a little turned away from the poem.
Now let's go back to our would-be guest that could not make it today, Elena.
Hmm.
Do you feel Elena can live the life of Melody Dickinson
Can do
with
what
this
now?
modern technology? Some people, the
Uh,
privacy is no longer as it used to be before. So, do you feel it is possible for her to have that kind of life in this jet
I
age?
think you'd have to completely disavow social media for one thing. I mean, you can probably maintain an email, but not be on any of the social media platforms and still be somewhat anonymous. I mean, the social media is definitely it's a commercial tool. They take your information and it's everywhere now. It's like anything you say on social media, anybody can access it for the most part. So I think that would be the only way you could live anonymously is just not have any social media accounts. I know some people that do that.
And despite that, I still believe that, there's what we call investigative journalism. When people cannot find you online, they will come to you. They will find you anywhere you go.
Hmm.
Not to talk of if you live in the city. You're not living in the village, So,
Right.
you're living in a city and you move around the town. You are not using a veil to cover yourself like Muslims, and you feel that no one will have access to you. One way or the other, they will capture you unconsciously, and you'll be surprised where you find yourself. So there are
Hmm.
people that I believe that it is possible if you go away from modern life, if you go completely out
Yes.
of the city, you don't have anything to do with technology, not even email.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Because as you
possible. And I
have
think,
the email, there's no way, one way or the other, you will have something that will push you to get certain thing connected, and the next thing you will not know when you're going to have something, maybe the video of your, there's this Google chat room. You can maybe
mhm.
unconsciously click the video parts and then you show yourself. So modern technology is really difficult for you. With modern technology, I don't think it's really easy for one to have the life of Emily Dickinson as a literature,
Well,
literatures.
one person that attempted also to sort of seclude was Ted Kaczynski. As you remember in the '90s, how they finally
Hmm.
found him,
Yeah.
and he was one that was just he was very anti-technology, industrial society, and he lived out. I think it was in Minnesota. I think he ended up living in a little shack in Minnesota in the woods somewhere, isolated. And he was, I guess, successful at it until he was caught, with being the Unabomber. So but he would go into little bookstores and stuff, and they would, he attracted a lot of attention in that regard. When he'd go into bookstores and he'd pick up books and just read through them as he was in the bookstore, and they said, that the workers there would notice him, especially notice him because he was always so embossed in his work, and the reading of books, and they just would be like, "Who's this guy?" They joked about him being Einstein.
At one point in your life, as a poet, you tend to appreciate nature, and you write. Even in
Yes.
most cases, most poets use metaphorical expressions. Through nature, they convey their message, imageries around them. I could see this in a poem written by Emily Dickinson titled A Bird Came Down the Walk. If you can find the poem, we can read that poem and then we discuss that. I think it's one of the simplest poems ever written by this powerful, unique lady in the literary world. A
Yes, I
bird
found it.
came down the walk. Have you seen it? Have you got that now?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay, I'll
oh,
go ahead.
please go ahead.
A bird, okay, a bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, to silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap, flashless as they swim.
Yeah. If you even if you follow the lines, you understand that it's prosaic. It's not really difficult. It's direct. A
Mm-hmm.
young reader of poetry will find it very easy to comprehend. It's one of the simplest poem of this unique writer or poet. And another thing you find in the poem is the rhythmicality of the lines. Look at the rhyme scheme, the sound, the beats. You could get that from the poem itself, and it's not too long, and it's clear and straightforward. So you can have a lot of imageries, packed together in the poem, and you see the way the poets arrange the words one after the other. So that poems remind me of modern poetry. I call it modern poetry because most writers nowadays are switching away from complexity to simplicity, which
Mm-hmm.
is the best way because if you want to send away readers from your writing, make it complex. You will not be communicating to them.
Right.
And people are not really interested in stressing themselves to challenge their brain to understand whatever you're saying. If you get it too complex, they get away from your writing. So that's why most writers nowadays are moving, most poets in particular, are moving from complexity to simplicity. And someone once said that the fact that you are complex in your writing does not mean you are superior to other writers. And the fact that you are simple in your writing style does not mean that you are inferior to those one who are complex in their writing style. So simplicity does not mean inferiority, and complexity too does not mean superiority. This lady has the two.
And you can
She
say,
switches. Yeah, I'm listening.
you can say some extraordinarily complex things in simple language like this there. I mean, you can speak like that in a poem and still be saying a lot of intricate things that are actually more immediate to the reader to understand, to their understanding through the simple language than using complex interwoven images and things of that nature.
What I gather so far about Emily Dickinson is that no matter the life you live, remember that it is temporary. This world is temporary. Whatever you achieve will end one day. You should always think of your last day. The death will come, whether you like it or not. You know, the Arabians are in a spiritual script. They say, "Inna al-maut alladhi tafiruna minhu fa innahu mulaqikum." The death that you are running away from, whether you like it or not, it will come to you. You know, it will definitely meet you one day. And then you're going to meet your Lord, you know, and you will account for whatever you do on this face of the earth. For those who believe, you know, if you believe that there's hereafter, you should prepare for it, because this life will end one day, and then we'll have to do whatever we can to prepare for the life after. So we'll be rounding up now as we have extensively explored the world. That's why we look at the lesson we learn, so that we should always know that our life is not permanent here. We should think of what will console us whenever we face challenges. And what is it? Death. Whatever you gather, it will definitely disappear. Or what lesson have you been able to gather from this faceless poet? Dustin.
I gathered much the same. Death is a constant friend, and it sounds kind of morbid, but if you think about how much time we have on this planet, life, as they say, is very short. And what would you be doing if you're not doing what you want in life? If you're not actively pursuing your ambitions, what can you do to go forward with that? You know, you don't have much time. You don't even know if it could be tomorrow. It could be the next day. It could be a week from now. It could be 50 years from now for you. You never know. I've seen a lot of people go, and it's very sad. And a life well lived is the most poignant celebration you can have for a person. And I appreciate our viewers today. Sorry we could not have our guest today, but hopefully we had a great conversation. I think this was a wonderful show. This is the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy our content. We talked about Emily Dickinson, the Faceless Poets, Anonymity. Subscribe, and thank you very much again for viewing this program. We're trying to get 1 million subscribers to our channel. This is the 1 million subscriber challenge. If you're a creative mind, if you know people that are interested in literature, poetry of any kind, ask them to subscribe, view our content, and have a nice day. Have a wonderful day. Go out and live.
Have a wonderful day. I think we've really had a very nice time. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to have you tomorrow, as we're going to bring another creative mind from another part of the globe. Thank you so much for watching. See you.